Hello, my name is Terry Cole, and this presentation was created for the Austin Nonprofit User Group. We had participants at our first viewing of this content from all over the country, and now I'm recording it so that more people can reuse it. The topic today is technical debt. My name is Terry Cole, and I blog at mightyforce.org. And I am the executive director and founder and missionary at Street Youth Ministry, and I'm a lone wolf admin of Salesforce for the last 6 or 7 years. Today we're going to talk about technical debt, and I'm going to provide an approach. It's the new year. A lot of people make resolutions. So here's what we're going to cover in a series of videos. I'm going to break it into smaller videos for bite-sized pieces. First, we're going to go through a definition in this section. Then we're going to do an inventory technique, and I'll show you my example. Then we're going to talk about when to work on technical debt. Then I'm going to try to go through some tools that I use in managing my technical debt. By no means do I have it under control, but it doesn't overwhelm me and depress me. We're going to talk about how I use Flow to help me with my technical debt. We're going to talk about a governance document. We're going to talk about a dashboard that I use all the time to show me how big we are and what's going on in my org. We're going to talk about Wall of Zero, which I use all the time. And then we're going to review some system tools that help with technical debt analysis. So that's a lot to cover. You can see why I'm breaking it up into pieces. So let's dig in. First of all, I like to tell you a little bit about myself. 3 things. I am a geek. I was in high tech for 25 years. I helped bring out things like Wi-Fi technology, DSL technology near the end of my career. And just so you know how long it was, I started building a 300 bit per second modem chip at the very beginning of my career. In 2008, I began working exclusively in nonprofits. I left the tech world, so to speak, although I jumped into Salesforce, so maybe I never left the tech world. And I work with homeless young adults since 2008. And in 2009, I adopted a little doggie named Rosie, who's still with me. And many of you know she's a great counseling animal. Now, before I would like to share an additional screen. Before I jump into that, I want to show you my org. I'm hoping that I'm doing that right and you can see it now. This is a little dashboard that I have that tells me how big my org is by data items. You can see I have 14,000 accounts, 13,000 contacts, 8,000 affiliations. That's relationship between contacts provided by NPSP. I'm sorry, relationship between contacts and accounts provided by NPSP, 2,400 relationships between contacts, 8,000 donations, 1,600 campaigns, 334,000 campaign member histories. So that's newsletters and engagements of some sort. We have limited use of cases, but we do it for transactions. We have 80,000 tasks, and we have a few custom objects. We have 5,000 SIM events that represent offerings that we do. It's our program management object. We have 20,000 client notes, which is our outcomes note, custom object. We have 110,000 volunteer hours, and we use NPSP data import on a regular basis as part of our data flow, and we have 5,200 of those records. So it just gives you some idea of what we have. Let me go back to my meeting control. Let's stop that share and go back to the presentation if I can be so lucky. So I just wanted to introduce the org a little bit. Now, technical debt, you can read about a lot on the internet. And in fact, I'm going to show you a definition first, and it comes straight from Wikipedia. Technical debt is a concept. It's not real, it's a concept. Um, it's a software development concept. It reflects the implied cost, so it's about cost. And the cost comes from additional rework that you need to do in the future. So it's a implied future cost concept. And the cost comes from choices that we make for an easy solution now rather than a better solution that would take more time. So that's a whole lot to unpack, but you'll find this definition very commonly available all over the internet. And I thought we'd start there. Now, you will also find a breakdown of technical debt all over the internet. I don't know how useful this is, but again, I thought we would start there. We break technical debt into deliberate and accidental or inadvertent, and we break technical debt into reckless and prudent. I'm not going to suggest that you classify your technical debt from this, but it's worth knowing what the experts and the theory people look at. Reckless, deliberate technical debt is when you purposely, intentionally don't do it right. That's probably rare, but we all have horror stories of people like that who have touched our organization and left technical debt. Deliberate, prudent technical debt happens all the time. We probably regret this later, but we do it all the time. We know the right solution, but there's not enough time, there's not enough people, there's not enough money, there's not enough something. And so we purposely divide the job up and we do part of it now, leaving more of it for later. That's prudent, but it's deliberate. All right, now we also have reckless inadvertent. This happens all the time and is probably the thing we need to do the most about avoiding. We use a feature without knowing what it's good for, and so we unintentionally do it wrong. We hear about a concept and we don't train properly on that concept, and we implement something and we do it wrong, meaning someone later has to do it right, someone later has to clean it up. This is probably the worst form of technical debt. Then there's what we call prudent inadvertent debt, and I'm not sure even what goes in this category, but this maybe comes after you have training and you look back at your implementation and say, oh my goodness, we did that wrong, but at least now we know how to do it right. So again, I don't suggest using these, but it's worth knowing what the experts talk about. Here's what I do care about. Technical debt affects real live people. It hurts people, in fact. It hurts you. You have to carry the weight of knowing all this technical debt exists, and it means you have to start working on things that are urgently needed to reduce technical debt. It affects your whole team. You can't work on everything you want because you have this technical debt. You can't do things as fast as you want because it is technical debt. And worst of all, technical debt may affect your whole organization and its metrics and its goals, and it may affect individuals that you're trying to serve or individuals that you work with. And that's possibly the worst. I am going to suggest we think about who does it affect. Who does it affect? Is it just me? Is it a particular team when they do a particular thing? And we're going to think about what it is that they do and classify technical debt that way. And we're going to elevate to the worst technical debt that is somehow visible on the outside. Let me give you some examples. I'm aware that we have some junk in our organization that I started, that we never finished, or that we started using and found a better way, and it's still sitting there. That bothers me, but it really doesn't bother anyone else. It doesn't really hurt anybody. Let's talk about technical debt that impacts team. I know of a few things that aren't implemented very well, and my team has to deal with it every time they start to log some client interactions at our program. They don't get to use the right words. They don't get to click the right buttons. They have to learn the weird way that works. And that hurts them every time we do certain things. Now, let me tell you about technical debt that hurts on the outside. I just sent out donor receipts, and we don't do a very good job of representing a new type of donation called donor advised funds. We were attaching them directly to the fund, which is an organization. But when we send out receipts, we send them to real life people, and they are upset when they don't see their donor advised fund donation listed under their name. And we unfortunately sent out 11 receipts like that this year, and 2 of the donors were not happy. So that's technical debt affecting people on the outside. It affects our brand and our reputation. Fortunately, they trust us, so I was able to talk them through it. But we are going to implement a solution so that that never happens again. So that's some ideas about how technical debt is. Now, let's talk about technical debt as a spiraling problem. It's insidious. Technical debt is not a big deal at the beginning. You have a little bit of it, it increases your long-term ownership cost a little bit, no big deal. But as time goes on, you take on more and more technical debt, and you start talking about the long-term ownership cost of a tool being too high, and you actually see people jump ship. They scratch their software tools and buy other tools. They talk about rebuilding their whole org to start over. And this is a gigantic cost. And the reason they talk about these things is because they have taken on so much technical debt that they're looking like this ship. It's on fire, it's smoking, and it's going to sink. A part of the problem with technical debt is it spirals. You have a little bit, and all of a sudden you have more work to do, and that more work causes you to not do something else very well, and now you have more technical debt, and that more work causes you to do that something else to do very well, and that causes you more debt, and that gets in the way of introducing new features, and so you don't bring out the right features at the right time, and people start doing things weird, and that causes more technical debt. Let's talk. So we're all familiar with that one. Let's talk about another thing that happens when you do things the wrong way. You cause future people who need to work on it to have to know way too much. It's called knowledge scope expansion. When you use a nice little self-contained feature, when somebody goes to implement improvements to that or maintain that or fix that in the future, they need to know all about that tool. But when you don't use a tool very well and you use kind of 5 tools all at once to solve the problem when maybe one of them or perhaps 2 at most would have done the job. Now, when somebody fixes that process in the future, they suddenly have to be experts in 5 or 6 tools, and no one person can know everything. And so we start making bad choices, bad implementations, and the sinking ship goes under a little more every time we do that. Another thing that happens with a heavily laden technical debt organization is our own personal software processes go out the window. We're so busy bailing water, we don't have time to write notes about what we did. We're so busy trying to keep the thing working that we don't have time to document how it worked. We don't have time to train users. We don't have time to onboard new users well, and so they don't learn how to do it right, and they do it wrong, and that just makes it worse. And lastly, we're so busy trying to implement features in a debt-ridden organization that we don't have time to maintain the organization. And that just brings on more water. And so organizations go down. They become hard to steer. They're not very responsive to new demands and new features that need to be implemented. Technical debt is insidious and it spirals out of control until someone eventually pulls the plug or jumps ship. And we have to stop it. So in general, let's talk about where technical debt comes from. And this is general, it's not specific to NPSP or Salesforce. Poor plans, lack of knowledge, lack of quality in what we do, lack of processes, lack of maintenance, and then data itself causes problems. So let's briefly go through some of these. Poor plan. We're all familiar with taking shortcuts, but planning starts with a good architecture. Planning includes how this is going to perform at scale and what happens if the scale grows. Planning includes how to secure the solution how to keep it private, how to keep it secure. All of those things go into a good plan. And when we don't do that, we're taking on water. Lack of knowledge. We start using something without adequate training about it. We start using something without adequate advice or experience. And yes, I use new features all the time, but I try hard to not jump too heavily into it initially. Learn about it before you make too many commitments and too many decisions. It's important to know the impact it has, a new feature has on an organization. It's important to know the limitations. Salesforce is really good about telling us about the cool benefits, but a lot of times they're not really good about telling us about the limitations and the impact on performance. Lack of quality. We all start implementing a feature without adequate user stories, without a user's adequate specification. Sometimes we jump in and start solving the problem without thinking about what the proper application program interface should be for this. How do we keep this little thing separate so that someone can maintain it and enhance it in the future without knowing all about everything? How do we factor the software so we don't repeat ourselves, so that maintenance isn't a problem in the future, so that testing can be thorough? How do we onboard the existing users, and most importantly, perhaps, how do we onboard future new users? I think we often overlook future new users as a very important source of keeping an organization afloat and nimble. Lack of software maintenance. We're always trying to implement new features, always trying to fix bugs, but we have to maintain what we have, and it depends on other components, and those components are rarely static. So we have to be willing to invest in maintenance of the status quo before we start adding features and enhancements. And then this last thing is very important, I think. Data quality has to be maintained. The problem I told you about an external donor getting a receipt that really kind of annoyed them is really about data quality. We have a whole bunch of different ways of representing donations and relationships, but we didn't do it consistently in one way. It's possible to do it multiple ways. We did so, we didn't detect it, and so receipts went out that were incomplete because we didn't realize our data was a little dirty or a little duplicitous. Managing your data quality is very much part of your technical debt. All right, now let's get specific about Salesforce. And do remember, I'm not trying to be depressing here. We're just going through it. We're about at the bottom of the bad stuff. We're going to start digging out with the good stuff soon. But all of this really matters, and it's important to be aware of it. The biggest source of technical debt, in my opinion, in the Salesforce orgs and in NPSP orgs is the clock and the calendar. Salesforce has mandatory updates 3 times a year. That's maintenance. They change all the parts that your organization is using every 3 months. And if you don't know what they're changing, you can find yourself underwater very fast. They bring out new features too, but they change the existing parts that you're using. Both of those are important. The Nonprofit Success Pack changes 20 times a year, every 2 weeks on a regular schedule. And they tell us what they're changing, but we have to pay attention to that. And sometimes they're changing things that will break our org. Sometimes they're changing things that are new features that we don't really have to pay attention to right now, except to know they exist. And other times they're changing stuff that we don't care about at all, and that's fine. But we have to pay attention. Your organization grows and the requirements change. We have to pay attention to that. That causes our organization to no longer fit our needs, and all of a sudden people are unhappy with it and it's sluggish and it doesn't meet needs and they're looking for other solutions. The people who use the tools change. We've already mentioned the great importance of training users, but you have to have a training program for new users to onboard the new ones. Their success or failure determines where in the water your organization floats. We've mentioned dirty data. Haphazard expansion rather than systematic planning happens all the time in nonprofits especially. And then lack of governance or recognizing where the governance is and what they're doing is a really big deal in Salesforce. There's a lot of decisions that have to be made, and you need to know who's governing and what they have decided. All right. So we have actually gotten through the definition and examples and sort of classification. I hope you're not feeling too bad, but if you're feeling a little bit bad, I think that may be the point. We all struggle with technical debt, and we've got to do something to make it better in our organization. And the rest of these videos are about tools to make it better. And next up, we're going to talk about an inventory technique that you can use to begin to feel better about what you've got to deal with. So thank you very much.